Okay, so we're still working with our Hogwarts app. And what I would like to do is to add a little bit of searching. And so the stuff that we have, like the data that we have the most of is students. So I'll build like a search field that will allow us to search a student by name, allowing for wildcards as well, and just show all the students that match that. So, you know, I could just search for the letter E and find all the students that have the letter E in their name, or I could search for some subset or a last name and find all the students that match that. So that's the goal. And so for that, I need a few things. I'll need a new controller, a search controller. I'll need a couple views associated with that search controller. One to display a search form and one to display a set of search results. And then I will need to do a little bit of searching by way of active record by way of that controller. So I'll build it out such that search is on a completely separate page, but you could also build this out so that you could potentially have like a search form at the top of all pages, right? Because that would probably be more realistic. Like if you're building a website that users are going to want to often search, it's very common to have that little search widget up at the top of the page. I'm just going to, for simplicity, have it on its own separate page. So I'll just make sure I'm up to date here. Okay, get add, get commit, done with the many-to-many. Rails generate a search controller. Controller search. And then that gives me this new controller. I'm going to open that up in here. So there's my search controller. This controller is not going to conform to Rails' standard RESTful routes, just because I haven't thought about it enough to think about if that would work. Typically, a lot of Rails programmers will try to make all controllers conform to the 7 RESTful routes, but when it's a search controller that only has like a search page and then a results page, that doesn't necessarily conform. I could probably think of some way to sort of force it into that model, but we're not going to go there. I will just create a method here called search page and a search results. Maybe that just can be results. And maybe this can just be index. Sorry, I'm thinking aloud a little bit here. But there you go. So I'll use index because that's like the default action for a controller. So the default action for the search controller will be to generate or to display the form that we're going to use to perform this searching. And then when that form is submitted, it'll submit the search query to this results action. The results action will carry out that search by way of active record and display the results. And so the goal here is this will render the app views search index.html.erb, which is a search form that will post to results, or post to the results action. And then the results action, after searching using active record, will display the search results in the app view views. Search results.html.erb. So that's the plan. That means I need 2 new views, and I can go make those 2 new views in the views folder. There's the search subfolder. Yeah.
So is there just a command that you can save to generate views?
Yeah. So
the controller one?
no.
It would just be repeating the controller one?
Yeah. At least that's all I've ever used. You never know with Rails. There could be some way of just generating views, but at the end of the day, it's just generating the files. So results.html.erb. Okay. With a new controller in place, I need a new set of routes. And so I'm going to build those over in the routing file. Control P, config routes. Here I can at least show you how I can take a little bit of Rails's RESTful routing and extend it a little bit. So for my resources search, I can ask for only the index. But then I can open a block associated with that resource, and I can ask for an extra collection called results, I think. I'll probably have to look this up, but so don't copy this down just yet, and we'll go see how this pans out. What I'm expecting is this will give me a /search route that should go to the search controller's index action, and then I'm hoping for a /search/results that will take me to the results page. But let's just see. So there's 2 ways to have Rails tell you the routes that your system has. One of those ways is from the command prompt. I can just ask Rails to show me the routes. The downside is that it displays it in this area here, and I've made an error in my routing file to begin with, so it can't show me anything. But nonetheless, the downside is sometimes the routes don't fit perfectly within the number of sort of characters per line. And so it's often better to ask for routes from the browser. And you can do that by just going to like a non-existent route, and it'll show you the routes. Again, I'm going to get an error because I've actually put an error into my routing file. Wrong number of arguments, given 1, expected 0. So what have I done wrong here? Let's go look at the routing file. Routing. I want a new collection route. Oh. Okay. It's a block within a block. So now I'm asking for my search controller, give me a RESTful index, and then add another collection route, meaning a route that doesn't have an ID associated with it. That's in terms of the whole collection, that will respond to a get on results. And again, let me just, before I know that this is actually working, now we can go over here. Oh, I can't even do that anymore, but I can do this. I could not just put in a bad URL like that anymore because that was taken to be a permalink. Now if I put anything in, I've got that permalink route, and then it would redirect me back. But if I do some key mashing / some other key mashing, that's definitely not a route that exists in my database, and then I get this routes message. And so we can look here to see what was generated, and you can see a get request to /search is going to load up the search controller's index action. That's what I wanted. That's good. And then a get request to /search/results is going to load up the search results. That's also what I wanted. So I'm happy. So let me go back and show you this line here. Again, we could have built this manually. I could have said a get request to /search goes to the search controller's index action, and a get request to /search/results goes to the search results, like that. There's nothing wrong with doing it manually. This is just more sort of working within the conventions of Rails. So 2 ways to accomplish the same thing. For whatever reason, I didn't used to trust like the auto-generated Rails stuff. I don't know why. I think when you first get to Rails, that there's so much magic that if that you don't understand anything and you're hesitant to use it because you don't understand it. That's how I felt when I first came to Rails. And so I would just manually create all of my routes because then I felt like I really fully understood them. But then when you use the Rails conventions, you just get so much more magic. So when you use the magic, you get even more magic. So once I got comfortable with the magic to a certain extent and started to use it, then Rails gave me even more magic. And then I could be comfortable with that magic after a while, and then yet more magic would be revealed to me. Again, similar to being a wizard, right? So there's the routes that I want. The controller exists. Now, in the index, I want to have an H2 that says search for students. And this is where I want the form. So like the form goes here. Oops, I'm in the wrong one. I got to take all these 3 lines away and put them into this file. Yeah. So that's in my index. And so let's go test just to make sure that the routes worked and that my views all linked up correctly. So I should be able to go to /search, and it says search for students, and the form goes here. Okay, how do we make a form in Rails? Well, if you go to the Rails guides and you search for the word form, you'll see there's a guide on something called Action View Form Helpers. So there's more magic available to us, little helpers that build forms for us. And one of the very first examples for that is a generic search form, which is exactly what we want. And so we can pull this code directly out of the docs, and I can explain to you what it's doing. So I'll put that in here. I'm going to modify it slightly. I want it to go to, and here's another nicety of the fact that I set this route up. There'll be a name associated with this route so that I won't have to, in my form, spell out the path as a text string. I can use the proper routing system. I just need to know what that name is. So again, I can go and ask for a route that doesn't exist, and I can look in this list here. There's my results path. What is the name of it? Oh, it's got a long name, results search index path. I can put that in there. So I got that from this column here, the helper column, which again, just using that Rails magic is just a little bit nicer because I'm linking things up without hard coding them. So if my routes potentially changed a little bit in the future, I haven't hard coded the actual path in, just the name of the path that I got from this output right here. And anytime you want to use link to link to any of your application, you can always look here and you go, oh, okay, when I want to go link directly to the student's index action, it's called the student's path, or the about path, or the root path, etc. So you can always come and look here to see the names of your routes. So this is going to generate a form for me. So notice I'm not manually building up a form with HTML, but what will be generated is an HTML form, one that uses a get method, one that has a label that says search for, that's going to be associated with a text field, which is going to be an input of type text, and there's going to be a submit button that says search on it. So effectively what will be generated for me is a form that's going to have an action, and that action is going to go to whatever my route happens to be. It's going to have a method that's set to get, and inside of the form it's going to generate for me like a label that'll be properly configured, an input of type text that'll be properly configured with names and IDs, and an input of type submit that will also be properly configured for me. But I don't need to put any of that in myself. And we'll be able to go to view source, and we'll be able to see what has been generated for me from this set of magic helpers. So let's go back to this index page and see what Rails generates. There's the form. If I view source and I enlarge the text, here's what was generated for me. A form with an action that's going to / search results. That's good. That's what I wanted. Method is get. That's also good. It puts in some best practices, meaning like this form, the char set for this form is UTF-8. So making sure that the form can support all different kinds of languages and emoji and everything like that. It puts a hidden input inside of the form that specifically tests to see if the browser actually supports UTF-8. So it puts a Unicode character, or the entity for a Unicode character, in there. And on reception of the form, if it doesn't get that same Unicode character, it knows that the browser that's sending the data is misconfigured. I guess its encoding type is misconfigured. One of the things that you'll struggle with your whole careers if you go into web development will be encoding types. There's just so many problems with mismatched encoding types and different browsers and different text files, and just it's a huge hassle. So this is Rails just trying to guard us against some possibility of getting data that's encoded in one encoding type, and we're assuming it's UTF-8. Rails will be able to detect that and potentially even mitigate for that. In the early days of Rails, the character that it passed back and forth was the Unicode snowman. But once Rails started to get a little bit more enterprisey, they felt like the snowman wasn't serious enough, so they changed it to the Unicode checkmark. So there's a little bit of historical Rails. We got a label here with a for attribute that links it to the input. That's another best practice. If you link your labels to your inputs with for attributes, then people who are blind that surf the web using screen readers, they can tab into an input and their screen reader can read to them that it's the search for. There's a lot of people that cannot see or have poor visibility that have to navigate the web with screen readers, and accessibility is a huge must for web pages these days, especially if you work for the government. You have to build accessible web pages, and there's conventions around that, so Rails is giving us some extra best practices here. And then there's a text field with a name and an ID of Q and a submit button. And so when I type something in here, click search, that goes to the search results page, and you can see the search stuff is up in the top here, which is why the snowman was removed, because in old versions of Rails, you'd always see a snowman on any search page appearing in the URL. The check mark looks a little bit more, again, professional. And the query's up there as well. What that means is that this query can then be now pulled out of the params hash and used to search the database. And so I can go back over to the controller, and in the results here, I can use that data to perform a search in my database. So I can say like students equals, and I can go to the student model, and I can ask for students where, and I mean initially I could do like a straight up match, but that'll only find like exact matches where you're like the exact student. But at least let's try that out, and then I'll fix it up a little bit more. So the params, Q, what's Q? Well, Q is what we put into the tag there. And that will get handed off to this result set here, and yeah, I could have like students found. How many students were found? Well, it's the student size. And then I could students dot each do student, and I could link to the student name and further link to the actual student, and all of this should probably come out in an unordered list. And there should be an LI. If you're trying to code along, I might go a little fast here. If students dot empty question mark. Sorry, no. Students found. Else another end, and then indent that. And that should be enough to display the results. So I can, how many students were found? If none were found, a little sorry message. Otherwise, generate a UL with however many students that were found as LIs within there. Should be able to go back to my home page and pick a student's name. Go to the search page and try searching for that student by name, and we found that student. But it only currently allows for an exact match, right? If I just searched for Smith, for example, no students found. So I want a wildcard match. And so I gotta go back over here, and instead of just doing the name is directly equal to params, I have to write the little bit of SQL that I would write if I was writing SQL. And that little bit of SQL would be like name, like, and then question mark. And what's question mark gonna be? Well, it's gonna be this param. I'm using a question mark just like we used to use bind parameters in WebDev 2 with PHP, right? So I'm gonna bind this data into the question mark here because Rails will do some extra scrubbing for me in terms of SQL injection attacks and cross-site scripting attacks. And then over on this side of things, I want to wrap the parameter in a string inside of percentages because percentages are our wildcards in SQL land, right? So now I'm saying replace this question mark with whatever the user searched for, but with the wildcards on either side. So now I could search for even just the letter E and find all students that have a letter E in their name, or Smith and find anyone's name who ends in Smith. I should now be able to go back over to my search form and search for Smith now. And I found Leopoldo Smith, but also Howard Smitham and Vela Smithham and Alfonso Smith. So I found all the Smiths. And again, I can also search for the letter E, and I can find, everybody whose name has an E in it. So that's a really quick implementation of a search form. I could now go to the application layout. So Control P to layout application, and I could link to maybe, let's see, here's the about path, put a comma there, and also link to search, and take that to the search path. Oh, search index path. And there you go. And so now, wherever I am on the website, I always can go click on search here, brings up my search form. I can search for whatever I want to search for. Smith. By default, it's not case sensitive, and I found all the Smiths, and I've got my little thing up there. And as I said, we could even remove the index controller and this whole index page, and we could put this whole search form into the layout, right? This will look ugly for now, but I could put the whole search form into the layout. And now I could have search available on any page, still working in the same way. And so that's another nicety of working with this. I'll leave that out. That was just an example of a possibility, but that's a nice possibility. So you don't even necessarily need that extra controller in view. That could be put in the application so that it would be present on all pages. And that was our whirlwind tour of search in Rails with a look at the building of forms by way of the form tag helper. Rails also has a form for helper, which is for creating forms that are associated with particular model objects. So for creating or updating existing models, you use form for. And then they've recently added something that integrates both form for and form tag, and I can't quite remember the name of that magical thing, but we'll look at that probably later on in the course as well. So thank you very much for coming to class today, everybody.